You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. They bloomed into existence without preamble, ethereal numerals shimmering just above the crowns of strangers' heads, like phantom diadems only I could perceive. The first sighting sent a jolt through me, a conviction that my sanity had finally frayed at the edges. I squeezed my eyes shut, rubbed furiously at the sockets, willing the apparitions away. But they remained, persistent and faintly luminous against the mundane backdrop of the world. It began on a Tuesday, bleached of any distinction, lost in the familiar crush of the morning commute. Pressed amidst the breathing throng of the train carriage, my gaze snagged on an incandescent flicker. Above the weary head of a woman beside me, a soft cerulean glow resolved into the number 43. Bewildered, I scanned the car. A businessman, engrossed in the glow of his own device, bore a stark 78. Nearby, a teenager whose hair blazed turquoise sported a fleeting 16. A silent, inexplicable census unfolded before my eyes, numbering every soul crammed into that metal tube. Every soul, that is, except my own. Disembarking felt like stepping onto unsteady ground, my thoughts a frantic scramble. The 2-block walk to the office became a surreal gauntlet. Numerals bobbed and drifted everywhere, modest single digits, imposing 3-figure sums. Their colors shifted too, the prevalent soft blue punctuated by verdant greens, pale yellows, and occasionally a deep, unsettling crimson. By the time I slumped into my office chair, the certainty of a profound mental fissure had taken root. Thoughts of feigning illness, retreating home, seeking urgent psychiatric counsel warred within me. Yet, observing the familiar figures of my colleagues, each now adorned with their own spectral number, a peculiar stillness descended. If this was madness, it possessed an unnerving internal logic. My training kicked in, the analyst within demanding order from chaos. I began documenting, a clandestine ledger filled with observed numerals and correlating details about their bearers. Initially, randomness reigned. No discernible link to age, status, or visible disposition emerged. Days bled into weeks, however, and a crucial pattern surfaced. The numbers were not static glyphs, but dynamic indicators. They fluctuated, mostly with glacial slowness, but sometimes with jarring velocity. My manager's 89 subtly eroded to 88 over 7 days. My desk mate's 32 vaulted to 45 overnight. The revelation arrived roughly 2 weeks into this altered reality, over lukewarm soup with my closest confidant, Lena. Her number, a respectable 62, held steady as she recounted the bitter details of a recent separation. As vitriol sharpened her tone, I watched, transfixed, as the 62 flickered, dipping to 61. Moments later, her narrative shifted, pivoting towards a nascent passion for pottery, her hands unconsciously shaping the air, and the number rebounded, glowing back to 62. The connection struck like lightning, not arbitrary, but resonant, a measure of something internal, something that waxed with contentment and waned with distress or inertia, a barometer of the soul's weather, perhaps. Armed with this fragile hypothesis, my perception of the world fractured and reformed. hidden currents became visible. The man huddled in a doorway near my building, the one who always offered a gentle greeting, radiated a consistent 72, a figure eclipsing many of the impeccably dressed professionals striding past. The barista at the corner cafe, whose smile seemed professionally laminated. Her 23 whispered a narrative contrary to her bright facade. An obsession took root, a voyeurism tempered by a growing uncomfortable weight. Watching the numerals climb and fall, he became my preoccupation. I witnessed figures plummet in the wake of heartbreak, soar with unexpected promotions. I saw a stranger's 40 leap to 65 when another passerby simply helped retrieve her scattered groceries. But understanding bred a heavy sense of obligation. What was my role in this invisible economy of well-being? Was I meant to intervene when a number spiraled downwards? Did this strange sight compel action? The answer arrived unbidden 1 month after the phenomenon began. Walking home through the deepening twilight, my eye caught a figure slumped on a park bench. Above him pulsed a number rendered in deep, alarming crimson. 3. The lowest I had ever witnessed. Something in his defeated posture, the utter surrender in his frame, tripped an internal alarm. Before doubt could anchor me, I altered my path. "Hey," I began, striving for casualness. "Everything all right?" He looked up, startled from whatever abyss held him. Yeah, fine." Ignoring the ingrained protocols of urban anonymity, I sat beside him. "You sure? You look like you're carrying something heavy." Silence stretched, and I saw the crimson digit flicker precariously between 2 and 3. Then, the dam broke. A torrent of words spilled out. A lost job, mounting debts, the crushing weight of perceived worthlessness, a future shrinking to a pinpoint of despair. As he spoke, I monitored his number, a knot of fear tightening in my chest, dreading it might extinguish entirely, though the consequences remained terrifyingly unknown. But a quiet miracle unfolded. As he unburdened himself, as I offered clumsy words of solace and simply listened, the number began, almost imperceptibly at first, to ascend. 3 crept to 4, then 7, then 12. By the time his voice trailed off, exhaustion replacing raw despair, it rested at 15. Still perilously low, yet the immediate visceral danger seemed to have receded from its hue. "Thanks," he murmured, rising slowly. "Don't know why, but I feel lighter, like maybe..." He didn't finish, just offered a brief nod. I watched him walk away, the 15 holding steady, a complex wave of relief and profound awe washing over me. I had shifted something, minutely perhaps, but undeniably. From that night, my purpose crystallized. Not always direct confrontation, often the smallest gestures sufficed. Paying for the coffee of the person behind me, offering a specific, genuine compliment to a strained colleague, volunteering hours at a local shelter. With each act, I observed the subtle lift, the fractional brightening of the numerals nearby. It wasn't a panacea. There were limits, painful ones. I watched, helpless, as Aunt Clara's number gently descended with the relentless progression of her illness, finally settling at a peaceful, luminous 5 before she passed from this world. I saw dreams fracture, relationships decay, and the corresponding numerical toll exacted. And always, the persistent, unanswerable query: why me? Why this solitary perception? A gift? A curse? A cosmic error? No answers came, only the deepening gravity of the knowledge I carried. As months scrolled by, marked by the ceaseless ebb and flow of countless digits, I became aware of another transformation, my own. Empathy, once an abstract concept, became a visceral reflex. I started decoding the subtle language of posture, the almost imperceptible shifts in vocal tone that heralded a falling number, sometimes even before I consciously registered the digit itself. I learned to listen differently, more deeply. My connections with others strengthened. Paradoxically, my career thrived. This heightened emotional acuity made me a more perceptive colleague, a more intuitive leader. A novel sense of fulfillment began to bloom within me. It was nearly a year to the day the phenomenon began, when a casual glance in a shop window stopped me cold. My reflection stared back, and above it, where nothing had been before, shimmered a number, 89. Strong, unwavering, rendered in a calm, steady blue. In that instant, the final piece clicked into place. The numbers hadn't manifested to fracture my mind or burden me with forbidden knowledge. They were a curriculum, a lesson in empathy, in the profound, intricate ways we affect one another, in the essential nature of human connection. The numerals persist, a constant silent commentary on the world around me. I still act where I can, seeking to nudge those invisible metrics upward. But now I do so with the quiet understanding that we are all interwoven, threads in a vast, complex tapestry of interaction. Each kindness offered, every moment of authentic presence, sends ripples through the fabric, consequences unseen but deeply real. I don't know if this perception will ever fade, or if another soul shares this strange sight, but this much I know with certainty. Even if the numbers vanished tomorrow, the lesson would remain indelible. The truth they illuminated is now etched into my being. We are all architects of each other's inner landscape, capable of raising or diminishing that invisible measure with every encounter. Every interaction, however fleeting, holds that power. So, the next time you meet another's gaze, remember the potential you hold. You might just be changing their number. Make it count. That particular night, the night the prosaic concrete shell of the warehouse revealed its criminal heart, etched itself into my memory like acid on steel. It began as just another rotation of the clock, another stretch of vigilant solitude, but it twisted into a desperate scramble for survival that irrevocably altered the trajectory of my existence. My name is Elias Thorne. For 3 years, the graveyard shift at Apex Logistics Hub had been my domain. Not a calling, merely a means to keep the wolves of debt from the door, while affording me quiet hours to wrestle words onto the page, chasing the phantom of a novel. Or so the narrative I told myself went, before that autumn Tuesday bled into Wednesday. October was tightening its grip, the wind keening around the building's corrugated edges, animating every shadow into a fleeting phantasm. I'd just brewed a thermos of bitter coffee, the steam mingling with the scent of dust and old cardboard in the cramped security kiosk. My notebook, pages softened with use, lay open beside it. The initial hours unspooled without incident, the familiar click of my boots on concrete during patrols, the rattle of locks tested, the long, echoing canyons formed by shelves laden with dormant cargo. This vast structure, a steel-ribbed labyrinth vaulting towards darkness, usually offered a peculiar peace. But tonight, an alien static prickled the air. Perhaps it was the metallic symphony of the roof groaning under the wind's assault, or perhaps the residue of the fictional tension I'd crafted earlier that day. Regardless, the sensation of being watched, of not being alone, clung stubbornly. Around the second hour past midnight, it came, a whisper of sound, nearly swallowed by the building's ambient sighs and rattles. Yet years spent listening to the nocturnal pulse of this place had honed my senses. It was discordant, foreign. I silenced the small television flickering in the kiosk, straining my ears. Again, a faint, metallic chink, followed by the indistinct murmur of human voices. They originated from the northern sector, a quadrant supposedly dormant, awaiting future shipments. A frantic drummer took up residence beneath my ribs. This wasn't the scuttling intrusion of a raccoon or the groan of settling pallets I'd investigated countless times before. This bore the unmistakable timbre of purpose, human purpose. Instinctively, my hand went to the radio, thumb depressing the transmit key, but only dead air answered. The northern sector, the warehouse's farthest reach, was a notorious dead zone, the signal choked by intervening mountains of steel and inventory. A precipice opened before me. Retreat to the kiosk, summon the authorities, and risk the intruders melting away, or venture forth, gather irrefutable proof, become the protagonist of my own unfolding drama. Retrospection screams the sensible path, the call for backup. But in that charged moment, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, and perhaps an echo of the paper heroes I conjured, I chose the latter. Flashlight beam cutting a trembling swath through the gloom, I advanced towards the northern sector, each footfall placed with deliberate stealth. The voices sharpened, coalesced into fragments of dialogue. "Quicker, damn it! The clock's bleeding," one rasped, impatience fraying the edges. "It's heavy, this lot," another grumbled back, the sound strained. Closer now, the thumping in my chest, a deafening counterpoint to my careful movements. I eased around a final stack of towering crates and beheld them, 5 figures swathed in dark attire, maneuvering containers onto a waiting forklift. My gaze snagged on one particular crate. I remembered its arrival the previous week, logged as electronic components bound for a local tech firm. But as one man jammed a crowbar under its lid, splintering wood, the contents revealed were not circuits and wires, but the cold, menacing geometry of firearms. My breath hitched. This wasn't petty theft. This was trafficking, vast and lethal. Perhaps I gasped. Perhaps a loose pebble skittered underfoot. Whatever the betraying sound, one of the figures snapped his head up, his eyes locking onto mine across the shadowed space. For an infinitesimal pause, the scene froze, a tableau of discovery. Then chaos erupted. "Intruder!" the man bellowed, his hand darting to his waistband. No time for analysis. I spun, instinct overriding thought, legs churning against the unyielding concrete. Shouts pursued me, the heavy thud of boots echoing my own frantic flight. I plunged into the maze of aisles, desperately trying to shake them, but they moved with a chilling familiarity, anticipating my turns, cutting off avenues of escape. Blindly, I bolted down one passage, only to find it terminated in a solid wall of shelving. Trapped, footsteps converged from both directions. Panic clawed at my throat. My eyes darted, seeking refuge, a weapon, anything. A sliver of hope, a narrow crevice between two colossal wooden crates, barely wide enough. Without a second thought, I launched myself into the gap, splinters tearing at my clothes and skin. I pressed myself flat, holding my breath, as boots pounded past. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, probing the aisle. A moment of fragile silence then. Spread out, check every shadow, he didn't vanish. Time was a luxury I no longer possessed. Discovery felt inevitable. My fingers fumbled for my mobile phone in my pocket. Predictably, no signal bars illuminated the screen. Despair threatened to engulf me, but then a flicker of memory. The emergency call function. A lifeline even in this signal-dead void. Trembling digits stabbed at the screen. 911. The agonizing seconds it took for the call to connect stretched into an eternity. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice, calm and professional, was the most beautiful sound I had ever encountered. In a choked whisper, I relayed the nightmare. Apex Logistics Hub. Armed men, smuggling weapons, hiding. They're searching. Hurry, please. Sir, remain calm. Units are being dispatched immediately. Can you stay on the line? Before any response could form, a hand clamped around my ankle like a vice, yanking me violently from my sanctuary. My phone skittered across the floor, the operator's distant voice a fading plea. I was hauled upright, staring into the furious eyes, obscured partially by a ski mask of one of my pursuers. Thought you could play hide-and-seek, watchman, he snarled. Dragged back to the central clearing, my arms were wrenched behind me, secured tightly with rough bindings. Forced to my knees, I faced the assembled group. What now? One asked, glancing towards the apparent leader, a tall man distinguished by a jagged scar cleaving his cheek. The leader regarded me with cold calculation. Loose ends are liabilities, he pronounced, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Deal with him, then we finish loading and disappear. A chasm of finality opened within me. This was the end, played out amidst crates and shadows, a consequence of misplaced curiosity and bravado. One of the men stepped forward, raising a handgun. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, the oblivion. Instead, the night air split with a sound more potent than any gunshot. The rising, insistent wail of police sirens, growing rapidly louder. The scene detonated into frantic motion. The men scattered, weapons clattering to the floor as they scrambled for unseen exits. Shouts of, "Police! Freeze!" reverberated through the warehouse, punctuated by the thunder of running feet. When I dared to open my eyes, uniformed officers swarmed the space. One knelt beside me, expertly slicing through my bonds, his voice asking if I was injured. The ensuing hours dissolved into a disorienting sequence of flashing lights, urgent questions, and formal statements. Most of the smugglers were apprehended, though a few had slipped through the net. The scale of the operation they uncovered was staggering. a river of illicit arms flowing undetected for months, right beneath my nightly patrols. As dawn painted pale stripes across the high windows, a detective approached me. "Mr. Thorne," Detective Harding began, his expression serious. "What you did tonight, the courage it took, you likely prevented untold violence. These weapons," he gestured vaguely, "were destined for terrible purposes." I could only nod, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving a residue of profound shock. "Just doing my job," I managed, the words feeling inadequate. A faint smile touched Harding's lips. "You did considerably more. That was genuine bravery. Ever thought about putting that to use? Law enforcement, perhaps?" A weak laugh escaped me. "Think I've had my fill of excitement for one lifetime. Thank you." Yet, watching the methodical police work unfold, a subtle recalibration occurred within me. The fear was receding, replaced by an unfamiliar resonance, a sense of tangible consequence I'd only ever chased in fiction. My quiet nights, the solitary pursuit of prose, they suddenly seemed distant, belonging to a former self. I had brushed against the raw edge of real peril, real stakes, and the retreat to mere observation felt impossible. In the weeks that followed, Detective Harding's question echoed. Perhaps that spark of courage, ignited in the crucible of the warehouse, wasn't an anomaly. Maybe it signified a capacity for something more than chronicling imaginary deeds. 6 months later, I stood on the parade ground of the police academy. The choice hadn't been simple, the training arduous, demanding reserves I hadn't known I possessed. But whenever doubt surfaced, the memory of that night returned. The cavernous warehouse, the glint of steel, the siren's promise, the memory of finding something vital within myself when everything was on the line. Now, cruising city streets, the blue and red lights reflecting in the rain-slicked asphalt, I occasionally cast my thoughts back to the Apex logistics hub, back to the ordinary night that fractured my ordinary life. And I understand, with a clarity born of experience, that the most profound dangers, the most significant turning points, often lie dormant within the utterly mundane, waiting only for the courage to investigate the strange noise in the dark, and the wisdom to recognize when the only sane response is to call for backup. The Ethelred Hotel materialized through the late afternoon haze, a monolithic presence against the declining sun. My briefcase, dense with the ballast of quarterly projections, felt heavier than usual, my schedule a tight coil in my gut. Whispers about this establishment had reached me, fragmented tales traded between colleagues fond of embellishing the histories of old haunts. Such folklore I dismissed. My world revolved around quantifiable data, the stark logic of spreadsheets, not spectral anecdotes. Yet, crossing the threshold into the lobby, an undeniable wrongness permeated the air. It hung thick and stagnant, laced with the scent of brittle paper and long undisturbed dust, the olfactory signature of a forgotten archive. The damask wallpaper, once opulent, now peeled in melancholic strips, revealing layers of bygone eras. Behind the imposing mahogany desk, the staff drifted with an unnerving underwater slowness. Retrieving my key, a heavy brass artifact, I offered a curt nod to the impassive attendant and ascended towards the 3rd floor. Emerging from the wheezing lift, I confronted a corridor that receded into dim infinity, paved with a runner whose intricate patterns were blurred by time and shadow. Antique lamps cast sallow pools of light at intervals, insufficient against the encroaching gloom. Each footfall resonated, a sharp report swallowed by the carpet, yet amplified by the vaulted ceiling, the sound seeming to shiver through the very structure, rattling the frames of faded portraits lining the walls. An unnatural quietude reigned, profound and unsettling for a hotel purportedly favored by travelers. Still, the morning's impending meeting anchored my thoughts, a pragmatic bulwark against rising unease. Within the room, my luggage hit the worn floorboards with a thud. Flipping the switch summoned a hesitant glow from a single humming bulb overhead. The space was a time capsule, furnished in a style decades past its prime. A bedspread blooming with faded crimson florets, curtains echoing the same motif. A towering armoire loomed beside the window, mirrored by a modest writing desk. The silence here was different, denser, more insistent, amplifying the sound of my own respiration, which felt suddenly shallow. Traveler's fatigue, I reasoned. Unpacking essentials for the morrow, I shed my shoes. The floor groaned beneath my weight, a testament to countless seasons endured. Touching the wall, the paint felt cool, textured with a fine grit. That musty odor persisted, suggestive of spaces long sealed against fresh air. My throat tightened. I uncapped a water bottle from my bag, gulping down the tepid liquid. After a brief pause on the bed's edge, a restless curiosity mingled with a desire for air propelled me back into the hall. Perhaps a vending machine, a distraction. I descended the main staircase, passing an ornate, time-silvered mirror. In its depths, the reflection of the corridor behind me appeared unnaturally shadowed, darker than the reality it mirrored. A frisson of cold traced my spine. Then, a soft, ponderous impact from the floor above. A footstep, perhaps, but oddly deliberate. My skin prickled. Just another guest, I insisted inwardly, starting the climb towards the sound, each riser creaking its protest. The fourth floor was dimmer still, the wallpaper here verging on disintegration. Peering down the deserted passage, I detected no movement, yet an incongruous miasma drifted towards me. The scent of damp earth, loamy and raw, utterly misplaced within these walls. My pulse quickened. The building itself seemed to hold its breath, expectant. Seconds later, the faintest rustle, directionless, ephemeral. Swallowing against a suddenly parched mouth, I remained frozen, listening, before retreating down the stairs, the oppressive silence chasing me. Old ventilation, understaffing, rationalizations warred with instinct. Reaching the ground floor, I discovered a small lounge, its furniture spectral under dust covers. Velvet cushions bore the imprint of long-departed occupants. Armrests were frayed threads. Dust clung to my fingertips as I brushed against a chair. Further exploration revealed a dining room, shrouded in darkness save for the emergency lights glinting dully on silverware arranged atop pristine white napkins. An air of disuse hung heavy. A faint, rhythmic tapping startled me, emanating from a corner near a passage likely leading to the kitchens. Drawn closer, heart accelerating, the tapping ceased abruptly. And then, the smell returned. That primal scent of wet soil, stronger now, raising gooseflesh on my arms. A dry cough escaped me. Though the shadows yielded nothing to sight, the sensation of being observed was absolute. Primal instinct screamed retreat. I backed away, returning to the relative openness of the lounge. At the front desk, I ventured a question to the attendant, a woman whose face seemed sculpted by fatigue, her eyes harboring a weary resignation. I spoke of the odors, the noises. She murmured about antiquated plumbing, the building's advanced age, yet a subtle quaver undermined her practiced reassurances. When I obliquely referenced the hotel's rumored history, she offered only a non-committal shake of her head, stating that century-old places inevitably gather stories. A flicker of something guarded in her gaze suggested depths unplumbed, but I didn't press. With a nod, I took the lift back to my floor. Inside my room, I secured the deadbolt and activated every available light, the overhead fixture and the small lamp beside the bed. Settling at the desk, I attempted immersion in my emails, but the hotel's Wi-Fi proved agonizingly slow. While the connection lagged, my gaze kept straying to the door. I forced my attention to the screen, conscious of a growing stiffness in my neck, the shallow rhythm of my breath, a dull ache beginning behind my temples. The bedside lamp sputtered, plunging the room into momentary blindness and jolting me upright. My heart hammered, perspiration beaded on my forehead. Rising to adjust the rattling air conditioner yielded little relief. The musty scent clung stubbornly. A shower seemed the next logical step towards rest. In the cramped bathroom, water pressure was feeble, the pipes groaning within the walls like a suffering beast. The confinement felt oppressive. I showered quickly. Emerging, I noted the time. Nearly midnight. Early start notwithstanding, sleep felt distant. My muscles remained taut, every creak from the corridor outside snagging my attention. The floorboards beyond my door seemed particularly vocal tonight, protesting what sounded like measured pacing, back and forth. Turning off the bathroom light, I stood near the door, listening intently. The pacing continued, then ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnerving stillness. My stomach clenched. I twisted the deadbolt again, confirming it was secure. Sliding beneath the covers, still dressed barring my shoes, I left the lamp burning. Exhaustion began to claim me, my eyelids heavy, when a low shuffle materialized outside. Footsteps moved past my door, fading down the corridor. Closing my eyes, I sought oblivion, counting breaths in the near silence. A fragile doze eventually came, thin and easily broken. It shattered moments later. A violent metallic clatter at the doorknob jolted me awake, heart slamming against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, fists clenched in the sheets, staring at the vibrating door. The rattling persisted, frantic, then stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin. Silence answered. I waited, breath held captive in my chest. After an eternity compressed into half a minute, soft footfalls retreated. Rising silently, I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. The hallway was silent once more. Through the peephole's distorted lens, only the empty, dimly lit corridor stretched away. The roar of my own pulse filled my ears. Sweat trickled down my temple. Easing the door open a fraction, I peered out. The corridor remained unchanged, bathed in the weak glow of the antique lamps. Vacant, soundless. Then, at the far end, near the final lamp, a flicker, a disturbance in the shadows. an elongated silhouette detaching itself, hunched and indistinct, before melting back into the deeper darkness. Nausea surged. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I retreated silently into the room, ramming the deadbolt home. Seeking distraction, I tried the television, but static snowstormed across most channels. A news broadcast flickered weakly on one, the intermittent audio and unstable picture only heightening my anxiety. Pacing the confines of the room, each creak of the floorboards, each hiss from the ancient radiator amplified my fear. Inaction became intolerable. An explanation, however terrifying, felt necessary for survival, for sanity. Sleep was impossible otherwise. From my suitcase, I retrieved a heavy-duty flashlight, a constant travel companion. Opening the door again, I swept the corridor with the flashlight's beam. Empty. I moved cautiously along the runner, the thick air heavy, humid, periodically tainted by that pervasive scent of damp earth. Reaching the corridor's end, near the unsettling mirror, I paused, scanning. My throat constricted. A faint scraping sound echoed from behind me, near the elevator shaft. Chest tightening, I spun around. Nothing. But the feeling of presence was undeniable, intimate, as if something stood mere feet away, observing. My skin crawled. The flashlight beam trembled. Forcing myself forward, I approached the elevator. Its brass panel was tarnished, one call button missing entirely. I pressed down. The doors groaned open reluctantly. Empty. Stepping inside, I jabbed the lobby button. The car shuddered, then began its sluggish descent, the overhead light flickering erratically. My reflection stared back from the polished steel. Pale, eyes wide, mouth a grim line. With a grinding protest, the elevator halted on the second floor. The doors slid partially open, revealing a hallway plunged into absolute blackness. My flashlight beam sliced through the void, momentarily illuminating peeling paint, the vacant eyes of old portraits. Then something traversed the opening, a shape vaguely humanoid, yet its limbs articulated at unnatural angles. The face remained mostly obscured, but the jaw appeared disturbingly elongated, and its eyes captured the light with a feral, phosphorescent gleam, like a nocturnal predator's. I froze, paralyzed, every nerve ending screaming. My legs turned to lead, breath hitched in my throat, sound refused to form. The figure shifted, withdrawing into the impenetrable darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs with painful intensity. Fumbling, I slammed my thumb repeatedly on the close door button until the mechanism obeyed. The descent resumed, agonizingly slow. I clutched the flashlight like a talisman, fighting for breath, mind reeling. A prank, or something utterly beyond comprehension. The lobby. The doors opened and I stumbled out. The front desk was deserted. The ambient lights, though on, seemed weaker, casting long, distorted shadows. "Hello?" My voice cracked, echoing in the vast space. No reply. A quick circuit confirmed my fears. The lounge and dining room doors were locked. The main entrance, too, refused to yield. The heavy oak portal solid and impassive against my keycard. Panic tightened its icy grip. A side door marked exit offered a sliver of hope, but the handle turned uselessly. It felt obstructed from the outside. Trapped. My phone displayed no service. The desk landline emitted only a hiss of white noise. Sweat traced a cold path down my spine. I stood listening, the hotel groaning around me like a settling beast. From upstairs, faint but distinct, footsteps echoed. Returning to the desk, I desperately shuffled through paperwork, seeking a master key, an emergency exit plan. A binder labeled Maintenance caught my eye. Flipping through its worn pages revealed not repair logs, but chronicles of inexplicable phenomena. Phantom scents, spectral drafts, recurring complaints of frantic scratching within the walls. My heart pounded. Entries described a figure haunting the upper floors, sometimes perceived as animalistic. Staff notes dismissed it as faulty plumbing or overwrought nerves, but frantic marginalia spoke of something skinwalker-like, warnings to never follow. Low growls heard in the dead of night, anomalous footprints terminating abruptly. The evidence mounted. I slammed the binder shut, fear of physical pressure in my chest. A sharp thump from behind the desk sent me staggering back, flashlight nearly slipping from my grasp. The beam landed on a small flush door I hadn't noticed before. A closet, perhaps. Silence. Then another thump, softer, more insistent, like something bumping against the wood from within. I retreated instinctively towards the elevators, but their silent, closed doors offered no solace. A stairwell beckoned from a corner. Torn between escape and a morbid need to understand, I hesitated. The closet doorknob turned, just a fraction. A low scraping sound followed from inside. That decided it. I fled towards the stairs, wrenching open the heavy fire door. Emergency bulbs cast stark illumination on each concrete landing. My ascent was a frantic scramble against gravity and rising panic, shoes hammering the steps, breath tearing at my lungs. Second floor. I paused, flashlight beam cutting into the black corridor. Still dark, still silent. Stepping onto the landing, knees trembling. I heard it, a skittering scrape on the concrete behind me. I whirled, nothing. A low hiss, like a drawn-out exhalation, brushed my ear. The stench of damp soil flooded my senses, thick and nauseating. My flashlight beam danced erratically. It unfolded itself from the terminus of the corridor, a calligraphy of wrongness against the gloom. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs too long, joints unnatural. The face remained indistinct, but the eyes, those eyes caught my light, glowing with a dull, predatory yellow. An immense pressure crushed my chest. My fingers went numb. Run. My mind screamed it, but my legs were rooted. The figure shifted, a subtle glide towards me. A soft clicking accompanied its movement, like dry bones rapping together. Galvanized by sheer terror, I forced a backward step. Flashlight gripped white-knuckled, then turned and bolted back into the stairwell, slamming the heavy door shut. I pounded up the remaining flights, ignoring the fire in my muscles, the ragged gasps tearing from my throat. Reaching my floor, I burst into the familiar, dreadful corridor, fumbled frantically with the key card, cursed as it failed, then finally gained entry. The door slammed shut, the deadbolt shot home. With adrenaline-fueled strength, I shoved the heavy armoire against it, a futile barricade. Leaning against the wood, panting, head throbbing, vision swimming, I listened. The silence roared. Then, faint scratching began at the door panel. I pressed myself harder against the armoire, heart threatening to burst, breath coming in ragged sobs. The scratching ceased, replaced by slow, deliberate footsteps receding down the hall. I remained there, braced against the barricade, for what felt like an eternity, staring at the door, cataloging every creak and groan of the ancient building. fear was a constant, visceral presence. My body ached with sustained tension, my mind replaying the image of those luminous, feral eyes. Dawn filtered through the grimy panes, a fragile truce. The nocturnal sounds had faded with the darkness. When the sun was fully risen, I cautiously moved the armoire, gathered my belongings with trembling hands, and forced myself to open the door. The descent to the lobby was nerve-wracking, every shadow a potential threat. The woman was back behind the counter, her demeanor unchanged, as if the night's horrors had been mere figments of my imagination. I demanded to check out. The meeting, the reservation, suddenly insignificant. She processed my departure with the same detached languor, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I snatched the receipt and pushed through the now unlocked main doors into the blessed normalcy of daylight. The fresh air felt like a physical release. I walked directly to my car, started the engine, and drove away without a backward glance. What resided in the Ethelred Hotel, I cannot name. The sounds, the pervasive scent of earth, the figure that moved with unnatural grace through the shadows, these defy rational explanation. But the certainty of the experience remains, etched into memory. I, a man of figures and facts, encountered something ancient and fundamentally wrong in those decaying corridors. That place altered me. Legends and ghosts remain concepts I struggle to accept, yet the echo of those footsteps, the image of that tall shape in the darkness, these are truths I now carry, inescapable and cold. Forgetting is a luxury I suspect I will never afford. The instant the filament surrendered, plunging the house into a primal dark, I understood this evening would deviate sharply from the expected script. As blackness swallowed the familiar room's whole, and the children's tremulous cries pricked the sudden silence, the mundane contours of a babysitting job warped into something jagged, threatening. What began as routine was swiftly descending into a crucible of fear, though the true horror wasn't the absence of light, but the presence lurking within its folds. My name is Eliza. For half a year, I'd been the Ashworths' sitter, a pleasant couple with 2 young ones, Clara, aged 8, and Leo, just 6, residing in a sprawling house nestled deep in suburbia's quiet lanes. Typically, it was effortless work, guiding Clara through fractions, supervising Leo's crayon masterpieces, orchestrating dinner, perhaps a film before the ritual of bedtime. Tonight, however, bore an unfamiliar tension. Mrs. Ashworth, handing over instructions, possessed an unnerving skittishness. "We aim for midnight," she'd murmured, her gaze darting towards the window panes like trapped birds. "Things have felt off in the neighborhood lately. Keep everything locked up tight, won't you?" A simple nod was my reply. Suburban anxieties were hardly novel. Petty theft, eccentric neighbors, the usual tapestry. After the Ashworths' departure, I settled into the anticipated rhythm. Initially, normalcy reigned. Clara wrestled with mathematics, while Leo, hunched over the kitchen table, populated paper with vibrant figures. Dinner was served and cleared. We were poised to unfurl a board game when the world stuttered. A flicker, a second falter, then absolute negation of light. The abrupt immersion in darkness was a physical shock. Clara and Leo gasped beside me. "It's all right," I offered, pitching my voice towards a calm I didn't feel. Just the power grid taking a nap. Let me find the emergency torch. My phone's screen cast a meager glow as I navigated towards the kitchen cache Mrs. Ashworth had indicated. Locating a sturdy flashlight, I thumbed it on, its beam slicing a path through the oppressive gloom. Precisely then, a sound, a soft, distinct thump from the upper floor, heavy yet muffled, like something solid meeting carpet. My pulse leapt. Clara, Leo, did you two wander upstairs? No. Clara's voice, small and startlingly close behind me, made me flinch. We're right here. I pivoted the flashlight, its harsh circle illuminating their wide, apprehensive eyes. If they were anchored beside me, what or who had disturbed the silence above? Okay, I managed, the word drier than I intended. Let's gather in the living room. We'll just wait for the lights to return. We clustered on the sofa, the flashlight's solitary beam throwing monstrous, dancing shadows onto the walls. Clara and Leo huddled against me, their small forms vibrating with suppressed fear. Another sound from upstairs, louder this time, definitive, undeniable. Someone's in the house, Leo whispered, his voice a fragile thread. A denial formed on my lips. Settling foundations, the wind's mischief. But a colder certainty resonated deeper. Something was up there. Listen carefully, I commanded, my throat tight. We need to be very, very quiet. We're going to slip out the front door and run straight to the neighbors. Understand? Twin nods, eyes enormous pools of fright in the dimness. We rose with agonizing slowness. I guided them towards the foyer, the flashlight's beam trembling in my unsteady hand. Halfway there, a floorboard groaned overhead. Footsteps, measured, moving towards the staircase. Panic surged, hot and suffocating. The front door was suddenly miles away, an impossible goal. Quick! The whisper tore from me. Hide! I propelled Clara and Leo into the narrow coat closet by the entrance, squirming in behind them, pulling the door almost shut. Pressed together in the suffocating confines, we held our breath, straining against the urge to make a sound. The footsteps descended, reaching the ground floor. Slow, deliberate treads pacing through the unseen house. I felt the children's bodies pressed hard against mine, shaking with silent, terrified sobs. Across the sliver of space beneath the closet door, the beam of a second flashlight swept past. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat I feared would betray us. The steps paused directly outside our refuge. Time stretched, became unbearable. I held my breath, arms clamped protectively around Clara and Leo. Please, the thought screamed silently. Please, just move on. An eternity condensed into a moment. Then mercifully, the steps receded, heading towards the rear of the house. A ragged breath escaped me. Okay, I breathed, the sound barely audible even to myself. When I open this door, we run, straight for the front door, as fast as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. Got it? Pale faces nodded in the gloom, filtering through the louvered door. My hand, slick with sweat, reached for the knob. Trembling, I turned it, easing the door open a fraction. The hallway stretched before us, empty. Our chance. Now! I hissed, throwing the door wide. We erupted from the closet, a frantic scramble towards freedom. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, wrestled with the deadbolt. Behind us, a sharp cry, the pound of running feet drawing nearer. The lock finally yielded. The door swung open, and we spilled out into the cool, indifferent night. "Run!" I screamed, shoving the children ahead. Down the driveway, onto the pavement, our lungs burning. A backward glance, compelled by instinct, a silhouette framed in the open doorway. My blood chilled. It wasn't alone. 2, no, 3 spectral shapes were emerging from the house's dark maw. We fled towards the nearest illuminated house, hammering on the door. "Help! Please let us in!" The door opened onto the startled face of a woman in her middle years. I pushed Clara and Leo inside, stumbling after them, slamming the door shut. "Call the police," I gasped, air tearing at my lungs. The woman, bless her immediate understanding, bypassed questions, snatching her phone and dialing 911 as I collapsed onto her sofa with the children, all 3 of us trembling violently, teetering on the edge of tears. The ensuing hour was a chaotic montage. Police cruisers bathed the street in flashing blue and red. Officers methodically searched the Ashworths' violated home, their voices low and serious as they took our fractured statements. They found the point of entry, a forced rear window, but the intruders had vanished like smoke. When the Ashworths finally arrived, their faces were masks of primal fear. Mrs. Ashworth enveloped her children, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Mr. Ashworth thanked me repeatedly, his voice thick with emotion, for safeguarding Clara and Leo. As the initial storm subsided and the police began concluding their work, one officer drew me aside, his expression grave. "You handled yourself incredibly well tonight," he stated, "but there's something more. We've seen a pattern of break-ins around here recently. This is the first time, though, they've targeted an occupied residence." He paused, hesitating. "And?" I prompted, a premonitory cold seeping into my bones. "And in every single prior instance, we discovered hidden cameras planted inside the homes. These aren't your standard burglars, Eliza. They were watching, waiting." Nausea churned within me. How long? How long had unseen eyes observed the Ashworths, observed me, moving through their lives, utterly oblivious? The officer continued, his voice low. "Our assessment. They were after the children. If you hadn't been present tonight." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging heavy and monstrous in the air. I knew precisely what he meant. The thought threatened to buckle my knees. In the days that unfurled, the sensation of being watched became a phantom limb, an itch beneath the skin. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sudden noise amplified into a threat. Closing my eyes invited visions of those dark figures spilling from the Ashworths' doorway. The family moved shortly thereafter, the house irrevocably tainted by trauma. I couldn't fault them. I relinquished babysitting entirely. The weight of responsibility in a darkened house had become an unbearable burden. Sometimes, in the deep stillness of the night, questions surface unbidden. Who were they, those faceless intruders? What grotesque purpose drove their focus on Clara and Leo? And the most chilling query of all, are they still adrift in the world, observing, anticipating their next chance? I recite reassurances. It's over. We escaped. We are safe. But a deeper, colder knowledge persists. The night itself concluded, but the nightmare casts a long, enduring shadow. Every unlit room, every floorboard creak, every flickering bulb now holds a latent terror. And so, I banish the darkness with lamps, verify locks with obsessive repetition, and sleep fractured, ever vigilant. Because I learned that night that monsters aren't confined to childish fancies. Sometimes they are terrifyingly real. Sometimes they are descending the stairs, just beyond the flashlight's wavering reach. That experience irrevocably altered me, altered us all, I suspect. It stands as a stark testament to the fragility of safety, the insidious way danger can infiltrate the commonplace. Yet it also unearthed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed, a ferocious protectiveness ignited by the threat against those children. Babysitting is behind me, but I've found a different way to confront the darkness. I volunteer at a shelter for women escaping domestic terror, channeling that night's fear into fostering sanctuary for others. It's an attempt to reclaim agency, to inject slivers of light. But regardless of the passage of time, that night remains indelible. The night the lights failed and the shadows stirred. The night I understood that the most fearsome monsters aren't lurking under the bed. They're the ones already inside the house. Such fantastic shoes. Mind telling me where they're from? The voice, buoyant and startlingly ordinary, sliced through our discussion of looming exams. Ilara and I halted, mid-stride, mid-sentence. A young man beamed at us from the bus stop bench. Dusk hadn't yet claimed the day. The autumn sky was a canvas bleeding orange into violet. "Oh, thanks," Ilara murmured, the ingrained politeness surfacing before apprehension could register. Just 6 blocks remained on our customary path, home from the university library. The street murmured with the low hum of passing cars, the distant bark of a dog, the solitary figure walking a leash across the pavement, quiet yet inhabited. He rose, the smile unwavering. Ordinary attire, denim, a simple pullover, perhaps a few years our senior, yet an unsettling current emanated from his movements, raising the fine hairs on my arms. "Silas," he offered, smoothly falling into step beside us, his stride unnervingly synchronized with ours. "You two attend the university?" Ilara's fingers found mine, a subtle pressure, telegraphing shared unease. Decades of friendship forged this silent language. Something felt dissonant. His questions tumbled out too readily, his proximity calculated. When silence met his inquiry, the edges of his smile seemed to fray. "Hey now, no need for that," he cajoled, closing the small gap between us. "Just trying to connect. You seem like decent people." The way "decent people" rolled off his tongue curdled something low in my stomach. Our pace quickened instinctively. He matched it without effort. "Where are you headed? Maybe I could accompany you." "Meeting friends," I fabricated, my voice a thin thread stretched over a pounding heart. "They're waiting." His attention, however, had already shifted inward. A predatory glint ignited in his eyes, incinerating the flimsy disguise of sociability. "Think you're above talking to me?" His voice amplified, bouncing off the brick facades lining the street. "I'm a good guy. You should feel complimented I'm even noticing you." He maneuvered directly into our path, a sudden barricade forcing our halt. Ilara yanked my arm, pulling me sharply across the asphalt. We didn't run. Running felt like bait, but our brisk walk escalated into a hurried scuttle, the easy rhythm of our earlier conversation replaced by a brittle, charged silence. He followed, inevitably. Each street we traversed, he shadowed. Every corner turned revealed his persistent figure trailing behind. His commentary grew barbed, invasive. Faces turned, registered the scene, then swiveled away. The familiar apathy of the uninvolved, each assuming another would intervene. "Just hold up a second," he yelled, near enough now that the cloying scent of his cologne invaded my space. "Let me show you what a good guy I can be." His footfalls accelerated. Ilara's grip became a vice. 4 blocks still separated us from home, but salvation glimmered ahead. Mrs. Azarian's corner market, a daily stop, a familiar haven. Through the broad glass window, I saw her arranging cans, her teenage son, Levon, bent over homework at the counter. Without a word exchanged, Ilara and I pivoted sharply, bursting through the entrance. The bell overhead sang a ludicrously cheerful chime against the frantic tempo of our hearts. "Mrs. Azarian," my voice escaped, pitched higher than intended. "Could we please use your phone?" One glance at our flushed faces, our wide eyes, was enough. Understanding dawned instantly. "Levon, lock the door," she commanded, her tone calm steel, already reaching beneath the counter. Outside, our pursuer hesitated, pacing the pavement, uncertainty flickering across his features for the first time. Mrs. Azarian spoke rapid-fire Armenian to Levon, who vanished into the back. He reappeared moments later, grasping a solid wooden baseball bat. Our stalker glimpsed it through the glass, his bravado finally shattering. He cast one last venomous glare in our direction before turning and melting rapidly into the twilight down the street. "The police are en route," Mrs. Azarian announced, draping a comforting arm around each of our shoulders. "You'll wait here." She ushered us behind the worn counter, pressed cool glasses of water into our trembling hands, and stationed Levon, bat resting against his shoulder, as a sentinel by the newly locked door. When the officers arrived, they meticulously took our statements, reviewed the security footage. Recognition flickered. He was known, a pattern of escalating harassment attached to his name. The clear video, coupled with our descriptions, finally provided the grounds for his arrest. The tremor of that evening reshaped our routines, though perhaps not as one might predict. Mrs. Azarian fortified her shop with upgraded cameras, a discreet panic button beneath the counter. Signs appeared in her window, proclaiming the market a sanctuary, a safe harbor for anyone feeling threatened or followed. Other local businesses mirrored her actions, weaving a visible network of support through the neighborhood fabric. Ilara and I continued our walks home from the library, but now beneath the watchful eyes of Mrs. Azarian, Levon, and countless other shopkeepers. We armed ourselves with safety apps, absorbed self-defense techniques. Crucially, we cemented our resolve to heed the primal hum of intuition, warning against facile friendliness. The city precinct initiated a community liaison program, educating residents on identifying and responding to street harassment, stressing that even passive presence, a call for help, or offering refuge, could disrupt a predator's intent. Our university paper published an account, not to sow fear, but to champion the power of collective vigilance, listing the growing number of designated safe havens. Just last week, during my shift at the campus coffee bar, 2 first-year students stumbled in, their faces pale masks of fright. Without pause, my manager secured the entrance and contacted campus security. The young women recounted a relentless pursuer, his invasive questions escalating to anger at their silence. While preparing hot chocolates, their hands still shaking, I shared our own story, not as a cautionary tale, but as evidence. They weren't isolated. This community stood ready. "You did exactly right," I assured them. "You listened to that feeling and sought safety." That autumn evening taught us the vast chasm between genuine warmth and its predatory imitation. True friendliness doesn't curdle into rage at rejection. It doesn't stalk, doesn't demand, doesn't wield guilt as a weapon. Now the casual defense, "I'm just being friendly," or the entitled barb, "You should be flattered," rings like an alarm when deployed to negate discomfort. They are tools to undermine instinct, to coerce interaction with malice disguised. Ilara and I still pass that bus stop. Sometimes a fleeting chill traces the memory. How easily events could have fractured differently had Mrs. Azarian's lights not been on, had our internal alarms not blared so insistently. But predominantly, my thoughts settle on the aftermath, how a single, terrifying encounter galvanized a neighborhood, forging stronger bonds of mutual protection. That is the enduring narrative. Not the fear, but the response. The transformation of just being friendly from a veiled threat into an authentic pledge, honored through action and respect. The quiet creation of spaces where safety is not merely hoped for, but actively upheld by the collective will of a community. The memory remains indelible. The first instance I registered it, the attenuated yet unmistakable cadence of footfalls patrolling the corridor beyond my door. Midnight had surely tolled, perhaps hours passed, and I'd only just collapsed into the embrace of an aged armchair by the window, seeking solace for limbs twitching with nervous energy. This airy floor of the venerable hotel promised as a sanctuary of quietude for those desiring seclusion, instead transmitted every groan of the floorboards from the hallway. Pressing an ear against the dense timber of the door, I strained to decipher the sound. Heel met toe, a measured tread, punctuated by a brief hiatus, then the soft pivot of a turn. No accompanying susurrus of voices, merely the insistent looping shuffle. Through the door's optical lens, the passageway swam in a jaundiced, feeble luminescence, revealing only the swirling geometries of the carpet and an extended vista of closed portals. No figure occupied the space, yet the steps persisted, unwavering in their rhythm, enacting some phantom itinerary. A constriction seized my chest. My throat felt parched, abrasive. My pilgrimage to this storied establishment was intended as a balm for the soul. A paradoxical choice, certainly, given the whispers of uncanny happenings that clung to its reputation like ivy. Solitude, however, not serenity, was my quarry. I sought a vacuum in which to purge the residue of ill-conceived ventures. What greeted me instead was this disembodied perambulation in the hush, when the first timid rays of dawn infiltrated the room through the ponderous brocade draperies. I remained unvisited by sleep, taut with irritation and a burgeoning dread. A resolution formed: ignore it. Attribute it to the groans of antiquated plumbing, the timber breathing with the diurnal shifts in temperature. Yes, that explanation would suffice. Downstairs, the concierge had offered a smile steeped in foreknowledge upon my arrival. a subtle inclination of the head that seemed to query, "The summit floor? We wish you fortitude." I dismissed it with a negligent wave. Phantoms held no currency for me, nor did archaic maledictions. All I craved was a brief furlough from the geography of my failures, the landscape of my remorse. Later that afternoon, propelled by a need for empirical evidence, I traversed the corridors. The uppermost level was an exhibition of time itself, lined with antique looking glasses in baroque frames and canvases obscured by dust, depicting anonymous visages, patrons or proprietors from epochs past, no doubt. Before a substantial rectangular mirror adjacent to the grand staircase, I paused. Its surface, imperfect and subtly warped, stretched my reflection into something spectral, elongated. As the corridor lamps executed a brief, stuttering dance, I could have sworn another form materialized beside my own, an indistinct blotch darkening the glass. A blink, and it vanished. Nerves frayed by exhaustion, I assured myself. Further along, I discovered a diminutive, neglected lounge, furnished with faded armchairs and a low table strewn with yellowed brochures, heralding bygone hotel galas. Among them lay a photograph, monochrome and curling slightly at its periphery, capturing the very corridor where I now stood, albeit in a different era. Guests, starched and rigid, posed against the wainscoting. My gaze dissected the image. The wallpaper's intricate pattern persisted. The mirrors stood sentinel, unchanged. And there, receding into the photo's depth, lingered a tall figure near a doorway, head canted as if eavesdropping. No inscription offered identity, merely a spectral imprint on silver gelatin. Replacing the photograph, I chafed my arms against a sudden, inexplicable chill. Night descended once more, and with it, the imperative to rest. As a flimsy bastion against intrusion, I wedged a chair beneath the doorknob. The footsteps recommenced, punctual as a morbid clockwork, tracing their slow, rhythmic circuit. Supine in bed, bedclothes clutched to my chin, I concentrated on the simple mechanics of respiration. An invention of a mind overwrought, I chanted internally. But then the door handle jiggled, rotated, as if manipulated by an unseen hand attempting ingress. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leaning upward, perspiration filming my brow, I watched the knob turn. The chair held fast. Silence ensued. No knock, no vocalized demand. Gathering courage, I crept towards the door. The instant my eye met the peephole, the corridor presented its usual tableau of stillness. Vacant. It was then that I perceived movement behind me. I spun, a gasp lodging in my throat. The curtain nearest the window billowed softly, though the room's air hung thick and motionless. The old radiator emitted a gentle hiss, but no draft stirred the fabric. A faint aroma permeated the stillness, reminiscent perhaps of antiquated cologne, or dust disturbed from some long-sealed recess. Retreating, I nearly tripped over my own valise. A visceral knot tightened in my gut. Something was undeniably present. Sleep remained elusive. Hours bled into one another. Then, in the tenebrous moments preceding dawn, I heard it inside the room. Footfalls upon the carpet, hushed yet irrefutable. Bolting upright too swiftly sent dizziness reeling through me. My palms were slick, my chest constricted. Fumbling for the lamp, I flicked the switch. Light flooded the room, revealing nothing amiss. Yet I felt an intangible brush against my skin, a proximity that raised the fine hairs along my arms. Straining my hearing, I detected a soft scuff near the imposing dresser. When I compelled my gaze towards the wall, a long, attenuated shadow stretched upwards, undulating slightly. It possessed no discernible source, no corporeal form to cast it. Tears welled, blurring my vision. A scream felt futile, pointless. I had sought isolation, and isolation I had found. Who existed to answer a cry? With morning's arrival, the footsteps ceased their haunting cadence. I descended hastily, confronting the morning receptionist. "Is anyone else lodged on my floor?" His smile was a taut, uncomfortable line. "No, sir, the entire floor is exclusively yours." My insistence regarding keys met with a shrug, mumbled platitudes about the building's venerable age, previous mentions of peculiar acoustics by other guests, but assurances that no tangible harm had ever befallen anyone. His eyes betrayed his true desire. To avoid complication, he proposed a relocation to a lower level. Perversely, I declined. An inexplicable compulsion anchored me there, as if the entity in the corridor demanded my presence, and some recalcitrant fragment of my psyche yearned to comprehend its motive. That afternoon became a meticulous examination of the door, the frame, the threshold. I removed the chair, flinging the door open abruptly near the anticipated hour of the haunting, hoping to surprise an earthly prankster. Emptiness greeted me. An attempt to capture the sound on my phone yielded only ambient creaks and sighs of the old structure. I paced the corridor again, pausing at each mirror, tracing the ornate frames with a fingertip, collecting dust beneath my nails. At one point, pressing my face close to the large warped looking glass, I confronted my own reflection, pallid, eyes shot with crimson veins, hair plastered damply to my forehead. As I stared, a flicker danced at the periphery. Maintaining composure became an act of will. Then, unmistakably from the corner of my eye, a shape drifted behind my reflected image. I whirled around. The corridor stretched vacant, though the mirror's surface seemed to shimmer, to vibrate almost imperceptibly. By the third night, my equilibrium was shattered. The external pacing resumed its inexorable rhythm. The handle turned, a gentle probing initially, escalating to a more determined insistence. My luggage became a makeshift barricade against the door. Soft scraping sounds feathered against the wood, followed by a whisper, so faint it was almost subliminal. Pressing my ear to the panel, I discerned something akin to respiration, ragged, deliberate. I retreated to the bed, the metallic tang of fear sharp on my tongue, my heart a frantic drum against my sternum. Shadows within the room deepened, pooling like spilled ink across the walls. The curtains stirred again in the stagnant air. Denial warred with the visceral tremor shaking my body. Then, the nadir. The footsteps manifested inside once more, circumambulating my bed. Reaching for the lamp, I found the switch inert. Attempting to rise, an oppressive weight settled upon my shoulders, a silent admonition. The air grew heavy, stale, evoking the scent of a long-abandoned attic. Gritting my teeth, I managed to activate the meager flashlight on my phone. Its beam sliced through the gloom, illuminating only empty space. Yet, projected onto the far wall, the impossible shadow reappeared, impossibly tall, its head tilted in mimicry of the figure in the old photograph. "Leave me alone!" The plea ripped from my raw throat, cracking. Silence answered, yet within that silence resided a chilling patience, as if awaiting my capitulation. My thoughts scattered like startled birds, escape, abandon the room, the hotel, this entire ordeal. But as I lurched towards the door, the knob rattled with renewed violence, accompanied by the familiar rhythmic tread from the corridor. It seemed bent on containment, trapping me within this terrifying loop. In a desperate symbolic gesture, I seized a bed sheet and flung it over the large mirror in the hallway, hoping to sever some connection. Stepping back inside my room, however, the footsteps followed, their sound now imbued with an almost mocking quality. I dragged the chair back under the knob, breath coming in ragged gasps, wiping futilely at the sweat beading on my face. My stomach churned. Resistance seemed only to amplify its dominion. Leaning against the door, I registered the severity of my trembling. I could barely remain upright. Sometime near dawn, adrift in a delirium born of sleeplessness, I tore open the dresser drawers in a frenzy. Beneath layers of yellowed hotel stationery, bearing the establishment's archaic letterhead, lay a folded note penned in elegant cursive. I cannot leave this room. He walks the halls every night, and when I look through the mirror, I see him behind me. A frigid wave washed over my skin. I was not the progenitor of this terror. This spectral drama had unfolded before, decades prior. The realization struck with chilling clarity. This presence fed on acknowledgement. Its aim wasn't annihilation, but perpetual, terrified captivity. Each night a repetition, each dawn a temporary reprieve. Drawing a ragged breath, I fought to steady the frantic pulse hammering against my ribs. I strode back to the shrouded mirror in the corridor, ripped away the sheet, and forced myself to stare directly into the flawed glass. For one protracted, nauseating moment, the silhouette materialized behind my reflection. Tall, leaning close, spectral fingers hovering near my shoulder, its form distorted by the antique glass. I blinked, hard. The corridor was empty once more, but the knowing lingered. It was there, waiting, perpetually waiting. I stumbled back into the room, slammed the door shut, and braced my body against it. Morning light filtered in, offering a fragile truce, a moment to respire. My body felt utterly depleted, as if subjected to nocturnal marathons of fear. Departure was no longer a choice, but an imperative. I packed with frantic haste, acutely aware of the prickling sensation at the nape of my neck. Reaching the threshold, however, the doorknob resisted, seemingly fused to the frame. I wrenched it harder, the wood groaning in protest, until finally it yielded. The corridor lay quiescent. Practically running, dragging my suitcase, I reached the elevator. In the polished surface of the mirror, flanking the elevator doors, I confronted my reflection, haggard, irrevocably altered by nights steeped in terror. As I leaned closer, attempting to smooth my collar, to impose some semblance of composure, I noticed it. My reflection's eyes held a depth, a darkness, not entirely my own. Its posture subtly differed, and hovering just behind that mirrored self, a faint, familiar adumbration, the tall figure. It lingered there, just beyond the threshold of direct sight, as if it had somehow infiltrated my very being, or drawn so near that true solitude was now an impossibility. The elevator chimed its arrival. Before stepping into the descending car, I cast one final glance at the mirror. My breath hitched. My reflection offered a faint, chilling smile, an expression I swear originated from no impulse of my own. A visceral lurch seized my stomach, and I recoiled, nearly upsetting my luggage. The corridor fell into profound silence, yet within the chambers of my own hearing, the pacing footsteps echoed, the steady, inescapable tread of something that refused relinquishment. I fled the building shortly thereafter, but even as the distance grew, a peculiar tension resonated in my muscles, a persistent stiffness across my shoulders. Later, catching my reflection in the plate glass of a shop window, I thought I glimpsed a shadow at my back, impossibly elongated. I looked again. It was gone, yet certainty has become a luxury I can no longer afford. Perhaps I carried the presence away with me, enshrined within the fearful architecture of my own heart. Perhaps I will forever feel that phantom pressure on the doorknob, hear that quiet pacing in the hallway of my mind, and glimpse that distorted shape hovering in every reflective surface, patiently waiting to be noticed again. No looking glass, however ancient, had ever unsettled me before, but the one salvaged from the dusty recesses of that antique emporium felt intrinsically wrong. Its frame, a heavy gilt impasto of writhing serpentine forms, seemed to possess a density that defied its appearance. The proprietor, a man whose eyes avoided mine as if fearing contagion, offered no provenance, merely swaddled it in brown paper and accepted my currency with a silent finality. A fool's errand, I thought, dismissing the oddness, envisioning only an eccentric flourish for my living space. If only I had listened to that nascent tremor of unease and turned away. Sunlight, high and stark at midday, flooded the entryway as I maneuvered the mirror indoors. I recall the peculiar way the glass seemed to capture and refract the light, holding it unnaturally. It radiated a faint, unexpected warmth beneath my fingertips. Propping it against the wall near the threshold, intending only a momentary assessment before installation, I stepped back. My reflection regarded me, hair unchanged, features familiar, yet marred by a dark bloom upon the shoulder of my shirt, a phantom stain where, in reality, the fabric lay immaculate. A disquieting pause. I blinked, looked down, then back. The blemish had vanished. Dismissing it as a trick of light, perhaps a smudge upon the aged silvering, I fetched cleanser and cloth from the kitchen, polishing the surface until it gleamed, spotless and inert. Through the languid afternoon hours, I passed the mirror intermittently, catching peripheral glimpses of myself. A subtle hesitation seemed to cling to the reflected image, a minute temporal stutter, as though my doppelganger lagged a fraction of a beat behind my own movements. A frown creased my brow, swiftly smoothed by rationalization. Fatigue, surely, born of long hours hunched over ledgers. I resolved to hang it properly, selecting a spot above a low console table by the living room window. The task required surprising exertion. Armed with a spirit level and hammer, I drove a sturdy nail into the plaster and carefully hoisted the weighty frame onto it. Stepping back to the room's center to gauge its placement, my gaze swept across the reflected panorama behind me. The familiar sofa, the drapes swept aside, the standing lamp in its usual corner. And then, incongruously, the reflection depicted the basement door, the one leading to the subterranean storage, as standing slightly ajar. A mere sliver, yet sufficient to reveal a wedge of profound darkness within. I spun around, heart quickening. The actual door was firmly shut. Returning my gaze to the mirror, the reflection now concurred, presenting a closed portal. A frisson of anxiety traced its path along my nerves, my arms suddenly feeling leaden. A trick of angles, I insisted inwardly, a distorted glimpse of the doppelganger handle. I pushed the feeling down. Sleep proved elusive that night, punctuated by the phantom creaks and groans of an old house settling, or perhaps something else entirely. Around the stroke of midnight, thirst drove me towards the kitchen, yet an undeniable pull drew me first to the living room's threshold. I flicked on the lamp, its low wattage casting my elongated shadow onto the walls, the mirror a silent obsidian eye within the dimness. Drawn closer, I leaned in, examining my reflected face. My eyes, webbed with red from sleeplessness, stared back without anomaly. No spectral stains, no temporal flickers. A wave of foolishness washed over me. As I began to turn away, a sound emerged, seemingly from the mirror itself, a delicate tapping, faint as moth wings against the glass. My pulse leapt. Stepping back sharply, I scanned the surface for cracks, for insects trapped behind the pane. Nothing. The glass remained flawless. My hand trembled as I traced the ornate gilt edge, the frantic thrumming in my wrist, echoing the silence that had abruptly descended once more. After several long, breath-held moments, I retreated to bed, though sleep remained a distant shore. The following day bled into a haze of exhaustion at my small office cubicle, a place demanding meticulous focus on documents and data entry. My concentration fractured repeatedly, my eyes straying to the clock, my mind snagged on the unsettling presence awaiting me at home. I confided in Marcus, a colleague, recounting the mirror's eccentricities. He chuckled, dismissing it as the charming imperfections of antiquity, jesting about haunted houses. I managed a strained laugh, but the knot of tension tightened within me. It was the instability of the reflection, the subtle heresies against reality, the phantom stain, the errant door that gnawed at my composure. I forced my attention back to spreadsheets, the numbers swimming before my tired eyes. Returning home that evening, I paused in the living room doorway, observing the mirror from a safe distance. It reflected the room faithfully, the hallway beyond, the firmly closed basement door, the furniture arranged just so, the curtains framing the twilight exactly as they were in actuality. A measure of relief eased my breathing. I prepared a simple meal, consumed it distractedly before the television's flickering light, and sought refuge in the cleansing steam of a shower. Afterwards, padding back towards the living room to extinguish the lamp, I froze. The mirror offered not my present reality, but a scene displaced in time or space. It showed me standing in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot on the stove, my gaze directed towards the cupboards. Yet I stood here, before the mirror, clad in my current attire, visible as a static figure in the reflection's background, behind the impossible culinary activity. The bizarre tableau held for a scant second before shattering, snapping back to a mundane reflection of me, motionless by the lamp. I stumbled backward, colliding softly with the sofa's arm, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, my throat constricted, silencing the gasp that rose within me. I could only stare, transfixed, anticipating the next violation of physics. A sheen of cold perspiration slicked my forehead. My hand fumbled for my phone. Call someone, Marcus perhaps. Demand they witness this madness. But the imagined sound of his dismissive laughter stayed my hand. Phone lowered, I compelled myself forward, drawn again to the enigmatic surface. My palm pressed flat against the glass. It felt cool, implacably solid. My own hand, pale and trembling slightly, met its faint reflection. Nothing else stirred. With a ragged exhalation, I switched off the lamp and fled to the relative sanctuary of my bedroom, leaving the mirror to its silent vigil in the dark. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow, shattered abruptly by a soft, rhythmic thudding, faint yet insistent, like deliberate footfalls ascending a staircase. It emanated from the living room. My heart renewed its frantic cadence, my mouth instantly dry. Slipping from bed, I activated the hallway light, its sudden glare harsh, and stood listening at my bedroom door. The thudding persisted. A crawl of goose flesh prickled my skin as I moved with excruciating slowness towards the living room archway. Reaching it, I beheld the basement door swung wide open. An impossibility. I never left it open. Its warped frame demanded a forceful tug to yield. Now it gaped, revealing only the Stygian darkness of the stairwell descending into storage. My gaze involuntarily flickered to the mirror. Its reflection showed me, yes, but turned, facing the reflected image of the basement door. As I watched, horrified, the mirror me stepped across the threshold in the reflection, descending into the reflected basement's gloom, while my physical self remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a primal fear. Nausea churned in my gut. A visceral coldness crept up my limbs. Logic screamed to slam the door shut, yet terror held me immobile, tethered by the mirror's gaze. "This is absurd," my mind insisted, a mere looking glass. But every sinew screamed otherwise. Inch by agonizing inch, I forced myself forward. My peripheral vision locked on my reflection, which now seemed to pace me, mimicking my reluctant advance. Reaching the gaping doorway, I seized the handle and pulled the heavy door closed. My reflection mirrored the action precisely. The latch clicked, a small, definitive sound in the charged silence. I swiped a trembling hand across my damp brow. Closing the door brought a sliver of relief, yet the sense of something lurking just beyond the wood, listening, waiting, intensified. I risked another glance at the mirror. It showed me standing before the now closed basement door, accurate for a fleeting moment. Then, a flicker of motion registered in the reflection's background, an indistinct shape slithering across the reflected hallway floor. No corresponding sound reached my ears in the quiet house. I whipped my head around. The real hallway was empty, silent. Returning my gaze to the mirror, the shape within its depths had vanished. Raw fear, cold and sharp, clawed at me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse hammering against my temples. I scrambled back to my bedroom, locking the door firmly behind me. Perched on the edge of the mattress, I fought to regulate my breathing, my fingers quivering uncontrollably. I strained my ears, listening for any recurrence of sound. Only the profound silence of the house answered. Hours passed in wakeful vigilance, my eyes fixed on the locked door, before exhaustion finally claimed me, dragging me into a fitful, unrestful state that was less sleep than surrender. Morning arrived, grey and unwelcome, bringing with it a steely resolve. The mirror had to go. Dressed, I marched into the living room, purpose hardening my steps, intending to wrench the cursed object from the wall and banish it to the garage. But confronted by its impassive surface, my resolve faltered. My hand hovered near the elaborate frame, recoiling from an almost palpable coldness radiating from the glass. My stomach revolted, fresh sweat beaded on my brow. Defeated, I retreated, frustration warring with a deeper, more instinctual fear. In the kitchen, clutching a mug of rapidly cooling coffee, I stared towards the living room entrance, a tightness constricting my chest. An hour crawled by before courage returned, enough to dial the antique shop. Perhaps they possessed some forgotten lore, some warning attached to this piece. The line rang, unanswered. I tried again. Silence. A profound sense of helplessness washed over me. I paced the kitchen floor, my gaze unwillingly snagged by glimpses of the mirror in the adjacent room. I feared looking too closely, feared what new anomaly it might reveal, yet I felt its presence constantly, a silent, waiting intelligence. Steeling myself, I approached it once more, confronting my reflection, pale, haunted, still clad in yesterday's work clothes. Reaching out with both hands, I grasped the frame. The surface beneath my palms felt unnaturally cool. The strain in my arms was visible in the glass. My head throbbed with fatigue. I pulled, attempting to lift the mirror from its nail. It refused to yield, feeling impossibly heavier than before, anchored fast. I strained, muscles protesting, but the frame remained stubbornly fixed. Fetching a screwdriver, my intent shifted to prying it forcibly from the wall. The instant the metal tip slid behind the gilt frame, a harsh, grating screech erupted from the mirror. The sound, sharp and violent, startled me so profoundly I dropped the tool with a clatter. My heart leapt into my throat. Snatching the screwdriver from the floor, I stumbled back, shaking uncontrollably. Then, the tapping returned. That soft, insistent rapping against the glass, rhythmic, demanding, like knuckles or fingernails on the other side. My eyes locked with my reflections. I saw its lips move, forming silent words, a desperate, soundless plea or summons directed at me, though my own mouth remained shut, my throat tight with terror. Nausea surged. I took another step back, but the reflection pressed closer to the glass, its mouth continuing the silent, frantic articulation of words I couldn't hear, couldn't comprehend. A high-pitched whine filled my ears. My breathing grew shallow, each inhalation a struggle. My heart hammered against my ribs with painful intensity. Escape! The imperative screamed through my mind. The front door lay behind me. I bolted, grabbing my coat, fumbling with my shoes, my gaze never leaving the mirror for more than a heartbeat. The reflection showed the hallway stretching behind me, but in its reality, the front door remained firmly closed, even as I stood before the wide-open aperture of the actual door. The stark mismatch sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. As I stumbled out onto the porch, into the blessedly cold air, I caught a final glimpse. My reflection was turning away from the closed door within the glass, its lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile of deep satisfaction. I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against the frame, gulping the crisp, untainted air. Relief, potent and immediate, washed over me, simply being outside, beyond its influence. The decision solidified instantly. It had to be removed, exorcised. How, I didn't yet know. Shatter it with a hammer. Consign it to the anonymity of a landfill. Seek out someone versed in such malignant objects. My hands still trembled violently. Sweat trickled down my spine despite the chill. Options tumbled through my racing thoughts, each feeling inadequate, potentially dangerous. I stood there on the porch until the shaking subsided enough to permit movement, then walked numbly to my car. I drove aimlessly, the suburban streets blurring past, trying to quell the frantic rhythm in my chest. Passing another antique shop, the thought of seeking counsel flickered, but the anticipated embarrassment, the sheer insanity of my story, held me back. I just drove, directionless, until the undeniable truth settled. Avoidance was not a solution. I haven't formulated a final strategy. I sit here now, just beyond my own front walk, typing this account into my phone, anchoring the horrific details before they blur. From this vantage point, I can see the living room window. The curtains hang partially drawn, obscuring but not concealing the wall where it waits. Thoughts of hammers and heavy cloths surface, yet a profound certainty tells me it won't be so easily neutralized. But remaining out here, a refugee from my own home, is untenable. To leave it unchallenged risks further incursions, more reflections diverging from reality, until perhaps the boundary dissolves entirely. The feeling of something insidious creeping up behind me, waiting to usurp my very image, is unbearable. I must confront it. What will happen when I cross that threshold again, I cannot fathom. But the knowledge that I cannot permit that malevolent glass to dictate the terms of my existence any longer fuels a desperate resolve. My heart pounds a frantic tattoo against my ribs, but I am turning now, walking back towards the door. I have to act before it finds a way to pull me permanently into its cold, distorted world. The scrap of paper materialized on my pillow, an unwelcome omen against the pristine linen. Its message, scratched in a frantic, angular script, "You can't hide," instantly dissolved the tranquility of my house-sitting assignment into a lethal shadow play. Suddenly, the Ashworth's cavernous estate wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage, and I, its designated quarry. My name is Alara, a postgraduate student bartering my summer vigilance for a simple stipend from the affluent Ashworth family. An effortless exchange, I'd presumed. Oversee their sprawling residence during their month-long European sojourn, tend the exotic flora, nourish the silent aquatic life, indulge in their crystalline pool and private cinema. What flaw could mar such a perfect arrangement? As fate decreed, everything. An initial week unfolded in quietude, a rhythm establishing itself amidst the opulence. The Ashworths had meticulously catalogued their existence. Hydration schedules for specific ferns, protocols for the labyrinthine security apparatus, even choreographed illumination sequences to feign occupancy. My days were a blend of thesis composition, sun-drenched poolside contemplation, and explorations through the mansion's seemingly infinite chambers, studies, guest wings, a vaulted wine cellar. The Ashworths inhabited a world far removed from my own. It was the 8th day when the harmony fractured. I stood in the kitchen, assembling a solitary dinner, when a distinct thump echoed from the upper floor, the sound of dead weight meeting polished wood. I froze, skillet poised mid-air, ears straining against the sudden silence. "Anyone there?" The question escaped me, instantly absurd. I was the sole occupant. A settling joist, perhaps? Or an object surrendering to gravity in some forgotten room? Yet an undeniable tremor of unease had taken root. Extinguishing the flame beneath my pan, I ascended the staircase, each step amplifying the frantic pulse drumming against my ribs. The upper landing unfurled before me, a corridor steeped in shadow, resembling the gullet of some slumbering leviathan. I activated lights as I progressed, methodically scanning each doorway. Nothing appeared amiss. No toppled artifacts, no breached windows. Order reigned, precise and undisturbed. Ready to dismiss the incident as a figment of an overtaxed mind, I pivoted towards the stairs. That's when I saw it. The entrance to Mr. Ashworth's private study, a heavy oak door, stood slightly ajar. I distinctly recalled securing it. Jasper, their Persian cat, possessed a penchant for shredding the costly leather within. With a hand that betrayed my escalating fear, I nudged the door wider. The room, at first glance, seemed untouched, but then my gaze snagged on the artwork suspended behind the vast mahogany desk. A banal landscape, whose value likely eclipsed my tuition fees, hanging fractionally crooked. Drawn by an instinct that screamed retreat, I approached. My fingers, trembling, reached out to rectify the painting's alignment. As it shifted, a subtle indentation in the plaster behind it became visible. A vault, naturally. The Ashworths would possess a concealed strongbox, but it wasn't sealed. A sliver of profound blackness marked where the heavy door failed to meet its frame. My thoughts scrambled. Could I have inadvertently triggered it? Impossible. Its existence had been unknown to me. Ergo, someone else had occupied this sanctum. I staggered back, breath catching in ragged, shallow bursts. The police, I needed to summon them. Escape. Immediate and absolute. I spun, intent on flight, only to collide with a solid, unyielding presence that hadn't materialized seconds prior. A choked scream tore from my throat as I flailed blindly. My knuckles impacted something yielding, eliciting a sharp grunt. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I thrust past the obstructing form and lunged for the doorway. Halfway down the grand staircase, a vice-like grip snared my ankle. Momentum carried me forward, my chin cracking against the unforgiving edge of a step. Prismatic stars burst behind my eyes. The coppery tang of blood filled my mouth. "Not so fast," rasped a guttural voice, male, chillingly unfamiliar. I lashed out with my free leg, a surge of grim satisfaction coursing through me as my heel found purchase against yielding flesh. The grip slackened. I scrambled upright, nearly tumbling again in my desperate haste, and bolted towards the immense front door, fingers fumbling frantically with the intricate locks. Just as freedom beckoned, a heavy weight crashed into my back, propelling us both onto the cool, expensive flagstones of the porch. We wrestled there, beneath the indifferent gaze of the twilight sky, a frantic ballet of desperation versus predation. He possessed superior size and strength, yet my ferocity seemed to catch him off guard. He hadn't anticipated such resistance. A well-aimed elbow struck his solar plexus, forcing a sharp exhalation of air from his lungs. That brief window allowed me to wrench free and sprint into the deepening gloom. The Ashworth estate grounds were a masterpiece of landscape architecture, vast and intricate. In the fading light, the sculpted hedges and meandering gravel paths transformed into an unnerving labyrinth. I ran without direction, propelled solely by the imperative to create distance. Behind me, recovering swiftly, His heavy footfalls crunched on the path, drawing inexorably closer. In desperation, I plunged off the manicured walkway, tearing through a meticulously cultivated flower bed into a dense copse of ornamental trees. Branches clawed at my face, but my pace remained unbroken. Eventually, the sound of pursuit faded. I allowed myself to decelerate, sucking in great ragged draughts of air. My body throbbed with a constellation of aches. Blood trickled warmly from abrasions on my arms and face. As my breathing began to regulate, I assessed my predicament, lost within the wooded periphery of the Ashworth property. My phone remained tethered to its charger in the kitchen. No bearings, no clear path back to the house or towards the distant road. And somewhere nearby, a man whose intentions remained terrifyingly obscure was hunting me. A strategy was paramount. Foremost, communication. I needed help. The Ashworths had neighbors, though the nearest dwelling lay a significant quarter-mile away. If I could reach it. A twig snapped sharply somewhere to my left. I froze, breath held captive in my chest. "I know you're out here." The man's voice sliced through the stillness, unnervingly close. "You're just making this harder." Motionless, I prayed the encroaching darkness would render me invisible. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he persisted, his tone attempting a false conciliation. "But we can figure this out. Just come out, we'll talk." An utterly vacant prospect. I'd absorbed enough cautionary tales to envision the conclusion of such a talk. With painstaking slowness, I began to edge away from the sound of his voice, each footfall measured, deliberate, seeking silent purchase on the leaf litter. After perhaps 20 feet, my shoe contacted something unyielding and cool, not earth, but metal. Lowering my gaze, a wave of near-hysterical relief washed over me. A maintenance access panel for the estate's irrigation network, and nestled beside it, a rugged service telephone intended for the groundskeeping crew. My hands shook violently as I forced open the phone's protective casing. "Please function! Please function!" I chanted inwardly, lifting the receiver. "A dial tone!" Tears threatened. I punched in 911, my eyes ceaselessly scanning the surrounding shadows. The dispatcher's calm voice answered, and I rapidly whispered my dire circumstances and approximate location. "Help is en route," she affirmed. "Stay on the line if possible." Before I could utter a response, a hand clamped brutally over my mouth. The receiver was ripped from my grasp. I heard it shatter against a nearby tree trunk. "Clever girl," the man hissed directly into my ear. "Not clever enough." I jammed my elbow backward, connecting solidly with his ribs. He grunted but maintained his hold. I thrashed, a whirlwind of kicks and desperate claws aimed at any exposed part of him. We tumbled together, a chaotic tangle of limbs rolling across the damp forest floor. The struggle resolved with me astride him. Acting purely on instinct, my hand closed around a fist-sized rock. I brought it down, hard, against the side of his head. His body went slack beneath me. A horrifying instant passed, where I feared I'd dealt a fatal blow. But then I registered the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Unconscious. Only unconscious. Scrambling clear, my entire frame trembled uncontrollably. Faintly, then growing stronger in the distance, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Help was arriving. I had done it. I was alive. The subsequent hours dissolved into a surreal montage. Uniformed officers fanning across the property, paramedics tending my injuries, detectives patiently recording my fragmented account. The man, as it transpired, was a seasoned burglar who'd been surveilling the Ashworth residence for weeks, targeting a collection of rare coins concealed within the very safe I'd inadvertently discovered. Artifacts whose existence had been utterly unknown to me. As the adrenaline subsided, the stark reality began to crystallize. The danger had been absolute. My life had hung precariously in the balance, but I hadn't succumbed. I had retaliated. I had prevailed. I had endured. The Ashworths curtailed their European tour, returning the following day. They expressed profound dismay at the events, but overwhelming gratitude for my safety and the foiling of the theft. Their offer of a substantial bonus was accepted without hesitation. Postgraduate studies exact a heavy toll. Remaining at the estate was untenable. Every shadow seemed poised to coalesce into a threat, each groan of the old house a potential footfall. Yet, while gathering my belongings, I caught my reflection in a hallway mirror. The cuts and bruises were stark, undeniable, but beneath them resided something new, a glint of tempered steel in my eyes, an unfamiliar resonance of self-possession. I had confronted a primal fear and emerged, altered, on the other side. Whatever challenges lay ahead, a quiet certainty settled within me. I could face them. Driving away from the Ashworth estate for the final time, a complex amalgam of emotions churned within me. Profound relief, yes, the lingering phantom of fear, but also, unexpectedly, pride. I, a grad student on a summer assignment, had faced down a hardened criminal and won. House-sitting likely wouldn't feature in my future plans, but self-defense courses and enhanced security for my own modest apartment suddenly seemed prudent investments. Because the crucial lesson etched into my psyche was this: the moment demanding a fight for survival can arrive without warning, and when it does, readiness is everything.